Welcome everyone to Ladder Daily Digest and
welcome everyone to Momo Nomo.
so a year ago, John Dehlin graciously, without too much arm twisting, agreed to come on our show. Maven wanted to co-host, and I wasn't exactly sure if Maven was going to make it, and so I asked Megan Connor if she'd be a backup just in case Maven couldn't do it because of some either appointment or some other thing.
Why didn't you ask me, Gene?
I didn't know who the hell Randy Watts was.
I wasn't even a twinkle in your eye.
Not even a twinkle in my eye. And so anyway, I'm not sure, Randy, if you had seen that episode since coming on as a co-host.
Actually, I did watch that episode fairly recently.
Well, I mean, you hadn't seen it prior to coming on as a co-host or any time earlier this year, right?
That's correct.
And so I figured that since you hadn't seen it yet, maybe 1,000 of the new subscribers that are new to the show haven't seen that interview either. I mean, you could do a search in YouTube, in somebody's channel and see what their popular videos are. And it's like the second or third video that's popular.
I was today years old when I saw that video for the first time.
That's right. So it should be relatively fresh in your memory, right? And the relative part is the 66-year-old brain that everything is relative to us. And so overall, what'd you think about it, Randy?
I thought it was incredible because, first of all, John Dehlin is a biggie. He's one of the pioneers. There were a couple of podcasters before him, but John came on the scene and virtually killed it. And the fact that you were able to interview him and glean some of that information, I think was very helpful. And I think people will be intrigued to hear a lot of the things that he has to say.
Yeah, so it was done in two parts only because I'm not very good at editing. We did sort of the first part was just John's story of starting up his podcast and some things. And then the second part was more centered on like advice to podcasters. And so I broke that up as two shows, and we can do the second part at a later date. But I wanted everybody to know that this week happens to be the week that 20 years ago, John Dehlin first released an episode or two or three or four on YouTube. He had done some things in probably like on however you released them 20 years ago. I don't know, using smoke signals.
Right. He had a string with a can on it.
Yeah, it was right after Fire and the Wheel was discovered as far as the YouTube internet goes. And he was, one of the early YouTubers and has been around for this Thursday will be the 20th anniversary. And part of this show is to celebrate that and to let everybody know that on Thursday afternoon and evening, we're going to be doing a live congratulations to Mormon Stories podcast. And thanks to John Dehlin for all you've done kind of a show. I don't know if anybody else is doing anything like that, and we'll see. And so I'm kind of an amateur historian. And to me, we are making history right now. The age of the internet is creating all kinds of interesting things. We have AI coming on the scene, like nobody's business. We'll say like AI doesn't care about everybody else, right? It's just going to take over the world.
And guess what? AI is dying right now, and synthetic information is the next big thing.
Yeah, and my son laughed at that because synthetic is actually a synonym of artificial. So, however many more iterations of that. Whether they'll maybe 5 years from now they'll come up with wholly made out of whole cloth.
I always thought of John as kind of like a launching pad, because when someone starts having doubts about the church and they look into podcasts to watch, John Dehlin is usually the one that comes up that people can start watching and kind of get a start into the podcast world. He does those long, long videos. So I think, people listen to him on and off, but he always seems to be that launching pad into post-Mormonism.
So yeah, Shalise Ansola, who runs Cults to Consciousness, she got a big break by appearing on John's show. She had already done some podcasting with Mormons and Mushrooms, or whatever the name of their show was. And she had a falling out with those guys, and she thought she would do her own show. And she might have had 10 or 20,000 subscribers. And John had maybe 30 or 40 or 50,000 subscribers a few years back. And John had her come on her show, and she doubled, and now she's passed John. And so anyhow, and then John was there for Alyssa Grenfell a year and a half ago when she didn't launch it, but she actually released her book, How to Be an Ex-Mormon, I think is how to leave the Mormon church. Yeah. How to leave the Mormon church. And so yes, and now both Alyssa and Shalise have taken over and surpassed John Dehlin, and they are the number 1 and 2 in the post-Mormon podcasting world. So do you have any introductory words to the thing, or should we just start the show and see what happens?
Well, it sounds to me like I need to get on John's show.
That's right, in order to be big.
I mean, yeah, if he's launching these people, I think I'm going to make that a high priority to get on John's show. Like I could call him and say, hey, let me be on your show, and he'd sign me right up, whatever.
Yeah, and I wanted to finish the story about how we did this interview. So Megan, as a backup, said that she would do it, and then John Dehlin pushed the start time from 11 a.m. to 2 for a recording. And so I told Megan, is that okay? And Megan said, I blocked out the whole day. So if she was going to block out the whole day to be the backup, I said, well, you have to be on now, even if I, pull myself from the lineup. But we decided that John is such a big persona, and I only have a question every now and then that I can think of, and usually a couple of jokes here and there, that it would be okay for me to be on with Megan and Maven. And so we did the show. So hope everybody can like and subscribe to our show and watch this if you haven't already seen it. And if you have seen this, but you want to refresh your memory or hear what Randy has to say, every now and then we're going to pause the video and we're going to have Randy chat about it a little bit.
You know how I know that this is kind of a vintage video? There's 3 things. Number 1, you're not wearing tie-dye in it. Number 2, Maven's hair is shorter than a missionary.
And not colored.
And number 3, Megan's not wearing her glasses.
There you go. And Megan's in her closet from way back then.
Right.
And Maven got all dolled up. So I'll say that she looks wonderful in it.
Oh, she does look wonderful. Her hair is just shorter than I'm used to seeing it.
She has her wartime Rosie the Riveter poster behind her going full swing. And so I'll go ahead and start the show, and then Randy and I will bow out for a little bit, and we'll come back and make some commentary a little bit later on. Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and we are here today to honor one of the pioneers and one of the greatest creators in, we'll say, the Mormon spectrum for now, and that's John Dehlin. And I just want to say ahead of time that I've known John since 2013. That's around the time I first started watching Mormon Stories. As I was questioning things, his podcast actually helped me stay going to church so I could sit next to my wife and hold her hand. And then when Kate Kelly got excommunicated, I stopped paying tithing. And when John got excommunicated, I told my wife I couldn't go to church anymore. And so we'll have to just hold hands somewhere else. And then, but it wasn't until COVID that I did a sort of a deeper dive and did all 40,000 hours of Mormon Stories. And so that's when I finally shared with my wife most of those things, starting with Cody and Leah Young, and then Dan Vogel's appearance and Hans Matzen. And in 1 week, my wife said, okay, I no longer believe.
For her. Yeah.
And so luckily I already had sort of jaded my wife a little bit, complain about little things here and there, and ask interesting questions. Like, I wonder why the church never told us about Joseph Smith's Rock in the Hat until the mid 2010s or something. And so she was already sort of like on her way, wondering, at least at that point, and she allowed herself to think for herself. And so that's an important thing. So thank you very much, John, for appearing on our show.
Thank you for inviting me. There'll never be a point where I'm like comfortable being interviewed, but I guess if I can dish it out, I need to take it.
That's right.
And you're surrounded by friends, one of which is Megan. So I just want to reintroduce Megan. I want to put her up at the top of the screen there. So we've had Megan on as the co-host before. You have your own channel. It's The Third Verse. And of course, I guess we're platforming this on both. So with Gina and I, it's Latter Daily Digest, and then Megan at Third Verse, which is kind of like a next step to your life. It's not necessarily religion focused. Is that correct? But just more change focused and sometimes really big changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, mostly change focused. And of course, Mormonism comes into it because that's my background and there's so much overlap there. But the podcast is called The Midlife Revolution, and it's all about making small changes that end up changing everything.
Okay,
and
perfect.
The scripture is called the Book of Megan.
That to be published later, I guess.
It needs to be embellished by future Megan worshipers in order to be true
I
scripture.
think you should start. I hear it's good to start with a near-death experience, Megan.
That's what I've heard too. I've heard a lot of people have had some success that way.
Dark humor. We just went dark.
How come no one ever starts with a near-life experience? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's get started. John, do you want to give a quick background story to how you started Mormon Stories podcast and what got you going on that path? And it's 15 years ago now?
20
years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've seen a lot of people come and go in the podcast sphere. So I'm hoping that us and then our audience, of course, can maybe learn a lot from somebody who's been able to have this much staying power. So,
Okay.
but yeah, how did it start?
I'll be really brief on this just because I get a sense y'all want to focus on stuff I haven't focused on before. If y'all want to ask follow-up questions, feel free. But the short version is, let's see if I can even do short. Raised in the church, served a mission, went to BYU, married in the temple, had a real first faith crisis on my mission because of corrupt sort of baseball, soccer baptism type things. But I recovered from that, graduated from BYU, married in the temple, and then following a tech career, ending up at Microsoft. I was called to teach seminary, started studying church history around 2000, in depth, reading all the books I was told not to read or was too afraid to read. Lost my faith in 2001, was in deep depression for about 3 years, and realized that with the rise of the internet, that not only I was, needing support, but there was going to be tens or hundreds of thousands of others who were going to be following in my wake, and that there were no resources available. So I left Microsoft in 2004, went to Utah State University.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you have a sense, John, for how much? I mean, you did say tens of thousands of people in your shoes as well, or did you know that, or I know a lot of people feel really alone and isolated starting out with this, and so how did you get to the point to knowing that there was a lot more people like you?
So I worked at Microsoft that had about 40 or 50,000 employees at the time, and there was this messaging board. It was an exchange server or exchange group called Mormons at Microsoft, and it had, I want to say, hundreds, if not 1,000 members. It had a lot of people, and I didn't have any restraint. And people would go up there and say, ward activity this or general conference that. So I felt like it was a place you could talk about Mormonism. And this is before I was really involved in bulletin boards or chat boards, or long before social media existed. And I'm just like, hey, I'm reading some books about Joseph Smith. Has anybody heard about, polygamy? And I just had dozens and dozens and dozens of Microsoft employees privately reach out to me and say, I'm struggling too, or I'm struggling with an addiction. My wife, I'm in the doghouse because she caught me, masturbating, or I'm gay and I'm married and I don't know how to tell my wife, and just all this depression and anxiety. Or I would meet ex-Mormons at Microsoft who had left the church over truth claims kind of stuff. And just with that small sampling of Mormons at Microsoft, after meeting with dozens and dozens of people, that's when I started to realize it was probably going to be big. But it was also just like my sense for trends. I just knew the internet was going to be exploding, that this information was going to become more and more available. And that as soon as people started talking to me, and then I started talking to people, I saw how the quote virus or the truth virus started spreading just at Microsoft. And I just put two and two together and said, this is going to be way bigger for the church. I don't know how else to say it, but I just, honestly though, I knew I suffered enough pain myself without any support from bishops or stake presidents or my brother or my wife or anyone. I just thought it was unacceptably painful to leave Mormonism in the 2000s. And I found a cause. I was always searching for a job I loved, a job I believed in. I didn't like working for other people, and I wanted to feel like I was giving my life to something meaningful. So it was like a gift and a curse all at once, because while I left a great job, while I was depressed for losing my faith in the church, I knew that this would be something I could give my life to, that would provide me with meaning and excitement and fulfillment. Now, I say that I left Microsoft in 2004. iPods hadn't really come on the scene yet. The Zune, I don't know if you guys remember the Zune, but it was some sort of Microsoft MP3 player that super
I had
sucked.
one. Yeah.
And I had no idea what podcast was in 2004. But later, after leaving Microsoft, I learned about podcasts. I got an iPod, and I immediately went to iTunes and looked up podcasts and then Mormon. And then I found 3 or 4 existing Mormon-themed podcasts that predated me. I don't know if y'all know this, but like New Name Noah had a podcast called The Church Is Not True, very subtly named. There was one called Catholic Mormon podcast about a mixed faith couple. One was Catholic and one was Mormon. There was another one called This Mormon Life by a guy named Dallas Robbins. And those were the main Mormon-themed podcasts that were there. And I'd always loved like Charlie Rose or Larry King or Meet the Press with Tim Russert. I just loved interview formats. Barbara Walters, NPR, Fresh Air with Terry Gross. I'd always just
One of the
loved.
podcast sounds like it was maybe imitating, This Mormon Life, This American Life. I think that's an NPR.
This
segment,
Mormon Life was named after This American Life, but it wasn't doing anything similar. It was. I don't even remember what the format was. All I knew is I loved the interview format. I followed it in other genres, and I thought I'd bring the interview format to this discussion about Mormonism. So
there you go. So Randy, you learned something about John that you didn't know before.
Yeah, I it's really intriguing to me to listen to how he kind of started into this. It sounds to me like he was a brainiac before he ever got started working for Microsoft and having a lot of people underneath him. I thought that it was interesting that he wasn't the first, the first yippee-ki-yay post-Mormon podcaster. That there were 2 others before him, and they kind of mentored him and gave him some thinking. But before he ever got into that, I think it's really interesting that he found out about, or he first at Microsoft would see bulletin boards with people's thoughts on it. And that's, I think, the twinkle in his eye for starting a podcast, because he saw these notes about people and how they felt about the church, and really intriguing. I think that seems to be what kind of got the gears rolling. And it's always fun to see the origin of people and how they started in this business.
That's right. You can't notice a trend unless something is happening.
Right.
So he was able to notice the beginning of that trend, that there were people with problems that were leaving the church one way or another. I'm not sure how much history was involved in it, but yeah, because Microsoft had so many employees, and so many of those were Mormons, that they were sharing their Mormon life and
Right.
problems on those boards. And that's kind of funny.
Yeah, they had nowhere else to go. So put a pin in it, put it on the bulletin board.
That's right. Somebody help me. And by the way, I have a lawnmower for sale. Right.
Right.
Okay. We'll continue now.
That's why I started in 2005.
Do you feel like you have an aptitude for speaking? I think maybe any more than the average Mormon, because as we're taught from a very young age to go in front of audiences and start speaking either at the pulpit, and then of course as a missionary you're really pushed out of your comfort zone there. So I'm curious, because it does seem to come to you very naturally. So do you think that's it, or is it just the Mormon upbringing, or do you think that might be an innate gift of yours?
So honestly, yeah, thanks. I love that question. Honestly, so in high school, I was a transplant. So like, a lot of believe it or not, even though I was 9 years in the same school system, like from 3rd grade to 12th grade, elementary, middle, and high school, all in the same school system, most of the people around me had been there longer. So I felt like I was an outsider. Plus I was Mormon. Plus a lot of the Baptists in my Katy, Texas town thought, Mormons were cults. So I didn't have like these established friendships or friend groups that I felt a part of. And honestly, I invested most of my time in my ward, first my branch and then my ward and stake activities. So I kind of never felt on the inside anywhere growing up. Plus my parents were divorced when I was in middle school. So yes, I was, on the basketball team in high school. Yes, I ended up student body president, but I still felt like an outsider. And what I realized really early on was that a way to get people to like you, and this sounds terrible, I don't know if it sounds terrible, a way to get people to like you is to ask questions about them and let them talk about themselves. So in a way, it was a way to like find friends. It was a way to develop connection and intimacy with people. But I think I innately was curious about people. When my parents got divorced, I really wanted to know why, because families are supposed to be forever. They were married for 25 years. So I remember talking to my mom and dad, like, why did y'all get divorced? What was wrong with your lives? Like, what was wrong with your sex life? Like, why couldn't you keep it together? Why were other people involved? And I got closer to my parents by talking to them about these really hard things. And I think I also come from a family that's kind of atypical. I feel like in my family, we were allowed to talk about anything. There was never really any elephants in the room that we couldn't talk about. So even the divorce, even my dad's first, second, third, fourth, or fifth wife, my mom's divorces, we just talked about everything. And I'm really grateful to my parents that they gave me that legacy that isn't quite associated with Mormonism. So I think that was the foundation. And then, going on missions, you do learn to build relationships of trust and ask questions of people. But I think I developed this interest and skill set in high school.
Yeah. I can relate to some of that as an Army brat. Like we moved around and not like fitting in, but I think I lacked the ability to, I guess, kind of click in and learn how to make friends. And in fact, for me, the fact that everywhere you move, there's a ward that's kind of your instant family, for me, almost made it easier to be lazier in a way, because you kind of had a built-in community. So as the further and like the older I got and the less that I tried, the more insular I became and the more difficult it was for me to relate to other people outside. So it does sound like something very unique about your family and about yourself. And then Megan, I think you were going to ask something.
Yeah. So my question is, do you think that interviewing other people about their Mormon experience and talking about it openly helped you to move through your faith crisis?
Who's coming in the driveway? Goodness. My daughter is being treated for leukemia.
Absolutely. Like, I had read a few books. I read No Man Knows My History, An Insider's View of Mormon Origins by Grant Palmer, Losing the Lamanites, Losing a Lost Tribe or whatever by Simon Southerton. I'd read Michael Quinn's, Power series. I probably read 10 or 15 books, but there's so much to learn about Mormon doctrine, Mormon history, Mormon theology. And even though I'd read a lot, like, as you all know, most of my listeners listen for a few years and listen to hundreds, if not over 1,000 hours of my episode. And that's just because Mormons are so wrapped around the axle. So there's no way without podcasts, without YouTube, without Instagram or TikTok, Mormon me in 2004 or 2005 could have fully processed the church, its theology, its doctrine, its history, its policies, and my own life. And to be honest, I'm seeing a therapist now trying to still process and work through what I've experienced. So yes, every single interview I did, whether it's Grant Palmer, Michael Quinn, Margaret Toscano, Paul Toscano, Tom Phillips, like every single interview, I'm learning new things. My mind is blown again. I'm getting tips and tricks. All the abuse victims, I'm becoming more aware of the abuse, or with women and feminists, I'm becoming more sensitive to feminist theory and the problems with patriarchy. Like, you can listen to my episodes, and some people actually followed less for the Mormon content and more for kind of like the reality TV. Let's watch John's evolution over time as he learns about what feminism is and what anti-racism is and how to be a better ally, or as he learns about LGBTQ issues, because I was a baby in pretty much every single one of those domains and still have an infinite amount to learn. So ton of
phases.
processing. What's
Like
that?
Faithful John, they reference your phases, people who have been around from the beginning. There's Faithful John trying to make it work, and then after the excommunication, there's Angry John, where you're a bit more spicy about things, and then it seems you kind of more or less come to a middle ground here. So
yeah, and if I could address that, that's a great thing to bring up, Maven. Like, so when they talk about Faithful John, I've tried to be honest about this, but I'll just be really, really direct about this. I had zero faith in Mormon Church truth claims by 2001. So 4 years later, I started the podcast. I knew the Mormon Church wasn't true in any way that was distinctive, or in any way that the church claimed. Now, having said that, I'd been exposed to, progressive liberal Mormons like Eugene England, Lowell Benyon, T. Edgar Lyon, the whole A Thoughtful Faith book by Phil Barlow. There's chapters by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich and Emmylou Thane, and all these Mormon scholars that still considered themselves believers, but very much in a more progressive way, where it wasn't one true church, and prophet could be anybody, and scripture is just myth. And then I studied Chaim Potok and books like The Chosen and The Promise, and My Name is Asher Lev and Davida's Harp. And I learned about Reformed Judaism, and I realized that the largest branch of Judaism in the United States was a form of Judaism where you didn't have to believe in God or the founder of Judaism, Moses, to still be a legitimate Jew or even a rabbi. You could be a lesbian rabbi who was an atheist and still be a Jew. And that's what inspired me to start the podcast. I didn't start it to take people out of the church or to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. I did love the church enough to want to see it improve and to want people to stay in it. But Believer John was never a literal Orthodox believer. Believer John was more like, Mormonism was good for me. I love my tribe. I love my people. I think the church does more good than harm. And I want to see it harm less people and do more good in the world. And so I'm going to do Mormon stories with the idea of providing informed consent, supporting people in their transitions, and then helping the church do better. And honestly, I think those motivations still persist to this day.
Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, so I'm really curious about, I'm sure that there were so many times during your personal faith crisis when you didn't really feel like interviewing people, or you didn't really feel like creating because you're going through this horrible, hard thing of a faith crisis. And so what do you do, or what did you do then, and what do you do now when you're not in a mental headspace to want to create or interview? How do you deal with that now?
We're on a mission to give 2 million people all around the world clean water. This village in Malawi now has clean water, impacting over 1,000 people.
This is the first of many projects we're going to be doing and the largest creator collab in history.
Over 3,000 of your favorite creators are all coming together. This could be one of the largest philanthropy projects in history. Team Water, all of us teaming up from around the globe to get clean water that will last decades to over 2 million.
Thanks for that question. Okay, so a lot of people, well, I see a lot of people in the world who are trying to like pursue, they're trying to figure out what to do with their lives, career-wise, creatively. And, you know, there's kind of this pithy, I don't know if it's Joseph Campbell, but sort of like follow your bliss. And there's kind of this glib thing where it's like, find out what you would do without getting paid, you know, find out what you love to do without getting paid and figure out a way to get paid for doing that. That is my life philosophy. And that has really worked for me. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because there's never a point where I don't want to interview somebody. 2,000 episodes in, 8,000 hours. I don't know how many hours of Mormon Stories content there is, but it's probably more than 2,000, given that my episodes are ungodly long. But I do just genuinely love asking people questions and hearing their stories.
So there you go, Randy. What did you want to say about this part of the show?
Well, I think that once again, it's just his process of creating the podcast. I made a few notes, and I'm going to take the liberty of looking at them.
Yeah, sort of like his faith crisis. Did talking to others help? Megan asked him if talking to others helped with his faith crisis.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds to me like that was imperative for him to talk to others. He loves to hear their stories. He didn't do it just to become popular. He did it because he loves the chance to interview anyone he can and glean from their knowledge, and that they don't necessarily have to fit into one. They don't have to be square pegs fitting into a square hole. There's a whole variety of people that have a story to tell, and he wants to hear each of their stories.
And then you talked about what led up to his excommunication.
Hence the name Mormon Stories Podcast. And I think this is the beginning of the end for John's church participation.
Right. And then he talked about what led up to his excommunication.
I think it's pretty much coming up, isn't it?
Oh, is it coming up? Okay. We'll see what happens on that. I'll head back over there and play it again.
So that's why this is a really good thing for me. I would be asking people to tell me their stories if I weren't getting paid and if it was just my time off. So I am unique in that way. Now, have I tired of like studying Mormonism or talking about Mormon themes? Yes, definitely. But
was there ever a point where it almost seemed you felt like quitting, or it seemed like it's not worth it and I don't want to do this anymore?
Yeah, I definitely have wanted to quit every single day, but it's usually around attacks, criticism, mean people, the complexities of the business, the difficulties of running a nonprofit, the stress of having to, be successful and to monetize and to make this all financially sustainable. Yeah, I've wanted to quit every day and still want to quit every day for that reason. But it's not because I get tired of talking to people about their stories.
Watch what magnesium does to your bowels.
If you have to wipe more than 4 times after you poop, here's why.
The Mayo Clinic.
So was there a moment at any point where you started with a lot of purpose? And so I'm wondering, did that initial purpose and knowing that you were reaching people carry you through? Or was there ever a moment where either a specific person or a specific story where it really landed for you that this really, really is helping maybe even more than you ever thought? And that you needed to be here rather than because you're very talented. You could do a lot of different things. So yeah, was there any kind of, I guess, defining moments early on that made you feel I'm in the right place and this is where I need to be?
Yeah, so originally it was literally just like comments on the blog or emails. So, if I put out an episode and then I go to the blog, because this is before Facebook and before YouTube, you can go to those early episodes of Mormon Stories podcast and see that some of those early episodes would have hundreds and hundreds of comments. That was really gratifying. Immediately people would, I was giving my email address out and people were emailing me with these big, long 7-page, this is my life story kind of things.
Sorry about that, John.
What's that?
I said, sorry about that one, John.
Oh, was that you? Yeah. I mean, I would get those. I just can't even. And for years and decade or more, I would read. I still do. I read every email that I get. I try to answer every one. It's harder and harder. But yeah, I would just whether it's comments or emails and all that, I would just, wow, this is really touching people. Wow, people are sharing with me. Wow, I feel like I'm really making a difference. And that was sort of level 1 feedback, along with like just stats. I would watch the stats and see the downloads grow of the MP3s. And I'd be like, wow, this must be providing value because people are downloading it. And then, but from there, the really big stuff came when people would be, I had a really close friend named Russ. He's still one of my closest friends to this day. He's like, hey, John, I live in Brooklyn and I'm flying to Salt Lake and I'm driving up to Logan because I want to meet with you. And he literally came all the way from Brooklyn to Logan, took me out for breakfast. And then after we were done and he told me his story and we hugged, he left me an envelope with like $500 cash. And I was like, whoa. But that was just him trying to say, thank you for what you've done. You saved my life. You saved my marriage. And, another friend named Kevin did that. He came from Wyoming and did the same thing. And it's not about the money, but early on, I learned that money was simply an expression of value or of gratitude for what I was doing. And so I never did it for the money, but over time I needed money to do it. And it got to the point where literally I was on the phone with every disposable hour, any road trip I'd take, anytime I drive to Salt Lake from Logan or drive back, I would either just be calling people or they'd be calling me, or I'd go up on Facebook and say, here's my phone number. Anyone who needs help. Because there was no Natasha Helfer at this point. There was no Tiffany Rowe or Julie Hanks or Jennifer Finlayson Fife. There was literally just me helping thousands or tens of thousands of Mormons work through mixed faith marriages, mixed orientation marriages, suicidality, eating disorders, divorce, depression, anxiety. And I was just constantly having breakfast, lunch, dinners, and phone calls with the Mormon world, just trying to help people however I could. And that was when I really knew that what I was doing not only was really touching people, but that maybe I could make a career out of it. And obviously that's when I decided to apply for grad school in a PhD program in psychology, because I didn't feel equipped to help all these people with all these very severe disorders they were, confessing or reporting to me. And so I just thought, well, I'll just get a PhD in psychology. Maybe I'll become a therapist. And even if I just keep doing the podcast, I'll be able to help people better with the training, with the education, etc. So that's why I applied to grad school. And that's how I knew that Mormon Stories was really hitting the mark.
And I think that was a good idea too. Do you feel like if you hadn't done that, especially given the sensitive topics that people cover in their lives, I feel like I don't know specifically, but I feel like I do see that you take proper care so that your guests aren't further traumatized more than necessary, or or at least the informed consent. And we saw with an episode that's not up anymore, but you've withdrawn from episodes before where it seemed like the guest wasn't doing well.
I mean, yeah, that's all the stuff I do feel like my training as a therapist helped me be more sensitive to my interviewees. I don't think I've perfected that by any means, but I do feel like my interview skills, my listening skills, my verbal cues all got better with grad school training in psychology.
If you went back, you would still make that decision, it sounds like.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was brutal. 6 years of a PhD with 14 peer-reviewed journal articles and 2,000 hours of clinical training. It was brutal. And I actually got 2 master's degrees or the equivalent. And it was brutal. I don't know how I did it. Like how I fed, supported my family financially as the only breadwinner with 4 kids, several of them in middle school or high school, while getting a PhD, while publishing research, while starting and running the nonprofit, while growing the podcast, and still being a decent, you could argue, decent husband and father. Like, I honestly look back and it's like a blur.
What would you do differently than looking back?
Oh man, so much. Oh my gosh. That's just a huge question. What would I do better? In which domain? In which domain?
I caught my stepson spying on me in the shower. At the same time that my husband used this trick to get hard, I discovered something crazy with a Boston doctor. I almost fired him until I let my stepson test it on me at dawn in the bedroom. It's really a homemade hardening trick, most effective for guys over 40. Did you know that your bat doesn't get stiff because the arteries are clogged with toxins that block blood flow down there? Well, that's when my doctor taught me a valuable lesson. Rubbing a little salt with hot water in the shower completely clears the blocked veins from your tool. Just 13 seconds and that's it. There'll be so much blood on your staff that it'll be hard to even pull.
I'm not sure. That is a really generic question. I guess maybe in the domain of keeping the podcast going, or actually this is something I'm not clear on. When you stopped to get your PhD, was that to gain a skill set for the podcast? Because you initially actually stopped the podcast at that point. So was the plan to come back to it, or was the plan to get the PhD and become a counselor, and that was going to be your future job?
Yeah. And you actually, you asked me about this before too, Maven. And now that it's worth mentioning that about a year into the podcast, so like 2005, 2006, I found out that like one of my listeners ended up, coming out to their spouse and as having lost their faith. And then, they ended up getting divorced or whatever. And because my parents had been divorced, because preventing divorce was one of my main motivations for the podcast, I took that really personally, and it freaked me out that someone would listen to the podcast and then as a result in my mind would get divorced.
So yeah, that was a problem that John had, was getting the different feedback from people and trying to, struggle with everybody's struggles. And you, Randy, had a comment about his education. So I think you're noticing now, in order for you to become a better podcaster, you're going to have to get that doctorate.
Not just a doctorate, but 2 masters.
2 masters.
So yeah, I'll need to take a break for a couple of weeks while I get that.
That's right. And John's saying he wanted to quit every single day because of things. And haven't I told you that sometimes?
Right. Yeah. But how, I love how he's just so cavalier about, yeah, I realized I was going to have to become a doctor, get my PhD, and I'll be danged if he didn't go do it. He had to take a break from podcasting for a while. I wonder why. But that's pretty amazing. I would say he earned his spot over and over.
That's right. And we'll continue on with it now. And hopefully I'll get to the commercials faster.
And the first time I shut the podcast down, it was just being freaked out that anyone would get divorced in some ways in any way associated with their experience with the podcast. And it took me a while before people could convince me, John, come back. It's not your fault. If someone gets divorced, it has nothing to do with you, or it's the church
It
that
could be a
set
good
that up.
thing.
Oh yeah, or it could be, but in my mind as a kid from a divorced family where I viewed it as not a good thing in many ways, it took me a while to just not take that personally. The fact that even just people would lose their faith, like I did intend for people to stay in the church for the first several years of Mormon Stories podcast, to the point where I created a website that's still up called staylds.com, where I wrote like an 80-page manual for how to stay in the church after a crisis of faith. I wanted people to stay in the church because I believed that you can't be the best human you can be or the best parent you can be without being Mormon. Like I really bought that hook, line, and sinker. And so the idea of people leaving the church over Mormon Stories in those first several years just freaked me out. So I shut it down at least once or twice for a number of months over the real consequences that I felt like the podcast was having in people's lives. You just have to know this was 20 years ago when podcasts were brand new. And it overwhelmed me. And I don't know if y'all can even understand that now in the world where everybody's got a TikTok and an Instagram and a YouTube and a podcast. But at the time it freaked me out. But then in 2008.
Have you ever wondered how buying Israeli goods helps Israel during turbulent times with attacks from extremists and anti-Israel movements? The answer is simple. By supporting family businesses, you provide stability on the home front for the defenders and citizens of the Holy Land. When our men are drafted into the army, they leave their jobs, their families, everything to fulfill their duty. Their wives and kids are left to run businesses alone. Right now, hundreds of Israeli businesses are struggling to...
Margie wanted to stay in Utah for grad school, and there were only a few schools I could apply to that had grad programs in psychology.
So go ahead and talk, Randy.
I was just impressed that he did what it took, and that his first goal was not to pry people away from the church. His first goal was to actually help people stay in the church. Like he said, he still has a site up, an 80-page explanation of how to remain a member of the church as you pass through your faith crisis. So yeah, it's not like he set out to destroy people's memberships. He set out to help people stay in the church.
But then in 2008, Margie wanted to stay in Utah for grad school, and there were only a few schools I could apply to that had grad programs in psychology or marriage and family therapy. It was BYU, University of Utah, and Utah State. And psychology PhD programs can be more difficult than medical school to get into, believe it or not. They're highly selective. Oftentimes they only have six openings in any given cohort, where a medical school might have 100 or more. So I applied to BYU, clinical counseling, psychology, and marriage and family therapy, and Utah State, clinical and counseling, psychology, marriage and family therapy, and the U. And weirdly, I got into all of my BYU programs, but I didn't think I had a chance at getting accepted at BYU running an edgy Mormon-themed podcast. So I shut Mormon Stories down before I applied to BYU. And also, my Utah State professor wanted me focused only on his research. So I had to shut it down for that as well. So I shut it down in 2008, got accepted, started in 2009. And then, frankly, I couldn't feed my family on the money I was making as a grad student. And then by that point, so many people were asking for the podcast to come back. I missed doing it. And I joke about this. John Larson started Mormon Expression, and I just was jealous that he kind of filled that void. And I was just jealous at the cool interviews he was having, or the conversations he was having, and the traction he was getting. And John Larson helped pull me back into Mormon Stories podcast. And I've told him this, he knows it. So in 2010, I just made a deal with my listeners. I said, listen, you keep telling me, listeners, that you miss Mormon Stories. I can't afford to feed my family. So I'll make a deal with you. I'll start a nonprofit. I'll bring the podcast back if you will just sign up for monthly donations so that I'm making at least more from the podcast than I would as a grad student. And the first year, 2010, my donors contributed $40,000 to the nonprofit, and that was the first year of the Open Stories Foundation, 2010, 2011, and it's been growing ever since because the donors keep supporting us. So
yeah. I want to know, you
back.
described Mormon Stories as edgy, and that's when you're talking about your believer supporter phase. And so I wonder if that was edgy, what was Mormon expression?
Well, if I could address that, like interviewing Grant Palmer. Well, my very first.
You probably know Vistaprint for business cards because we've printed them for millions of small businesses over the past.
My second episode, my first episode was just about it was about my mission and the soccer baptisms and the corruption in my mission. Yeah, who in the world had gone on the internet using their real name and started talking about serious problems with the church? That was an edgy episode. And then I interviewed Greg Prince about David O. McKay and the rise of modern Mormonism, and he's talking about Bruce R. McConkey's Mormon doctrine being, the brethren being angry about Bruce R. McConkey's Mormon doctrine and how they punished him, and the Hugh B. Brown, David O. McKay priesthood band stuff. Like, that was an edgy interview. And then I interviewed an ex-Mormon. I was the first person I know of to interview an ex-Mormon to tell their full exit narrative on a podcast. Greg Prince told me, don't interview an ex-Mormon and certainly don't release it because it'll put you on the bad side of the brethren. But I was like, I'm not just going to interview faithful people. I'm going to interview people from all sides of the spectrum. But the biggest one of all was interviewing Grant Palmer. That was in my first 30-ish episodes. And he had just released that book, An Insider's View of Mormon Origins. He had been an institute seminary teacher for decades. And then he wrote this book that was taking Mormonism by storm. He was disfellowshipped for the book. Eventually, he was excommunicated for it. And here I am giving audience to one of the arch critics of the church who was basically saying Joseph Smith was a fraud and the Book of Mormon was a fraud. Yeah, that was controversial. Daniel Peterson tagged me as an enemy like 30 episodes into Mormon Stories. I was on the Fair Mormon support board. I was part of Fair Mormon for a while, and they kicked me off their email groups, as I remember it, simply for interviewing Grant Palmer. Now, I followed up with Richard Bushman. I gave Richard Bushman equal time. But yeah, Margaret Toscano, Paul Toscano, I went straight for the September 6th and interviewed as many of the September 6th as I could because I had been influenced by them at BYU. So I hit controversies. I interviewed gay Mormons in the very first, 30-ish episodes, mixed orientation. As I could because I'd been influenced by them at BYU. So I hit controversies. I interviewed gay Mormons in the very first, 30-ish episodes, mixed orientation marriages. I interviewed Darius Gray and Margaret Young about the priesthood ban. Again, Darren Smith. All of these are like in the first 30 episodes. I'm hitting homosexuality, racism, feminism, sexism. Joseph Smith is a fraud. Yeah, how could that be any more controversial other than just like to do the temple ceremony like from the start? You know what I mean? I don't know what else I would have to do.
No, that's a good point. And I think maybe that just kind of goes to show how different things are. Where I've come in, I'm like a baby Exmo, and I'm still not using my real name. So yeah, compared to the environment that you came out in, because I've been looking over some of the early episodes and they seem very tame, or I'm seeing that they're from a lot of still faithful, nuanced members. that primarily that's where most of it came from. But I think that was great to point out how different things were then versus today. So
yeah, so I have a question about that too. So when you started doing these interviews that you saw as edgy at the time, was there any part of you that was afraid you were going to get excommunicated or at least disciplined by the brethren, or that something negative was going to happen?
Absolutely. In fact, as soon as before I ever bought that microphone on Amazon, before I ever pushed the button to purchase that microphone, and then whenever I was about to push the publish button for my very first episode, I knew the chances were greater than 50% I would end up excommunicated. And I knew that because I knew about Fawn Brodie, I knew about Juanita Brooks, I lived through the September 6th while I was at BYU, and the others like Brett Metcalf and David Wright and Margaret Toscano. I knew about Grant Palmer, and I knew the church. Sonia Johnson. I knew the church. I even knew about Lowell Benyon and Tia Gerlion getting fired. Like, the church has silenced and excommunicated and punished its critics from the start. So I had an eye of faith that somehow I would be able to stave off excommunication. I didn't want to be excommunicated, but I knew, that church parable with the snake telling the Native American, you knew who I was when you picked me up.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what snake I was picking up, and I knew what likely the outcome would be. The trick for me was to see how long I could go without being excommunicated. And I'm kind of proud to say I went 10 years.
Yeah, that's remarkable that you lasted that long. And then my follow-up question to that is,
so we'll let you, Randy, talk about what you think about that last little bit.
Well, here we're getting into the fear and the trepidation that he has about possibly being excommunicated, but it certainly was not a big enough fear to keep him from bringing out the truth. He goes on to say in a little while that, to tell him that he has to take something down is like throwing fuel on the fire. He's not going to give in that easily.
It's
and
like when Obi-Wan Kenobi gets killed. He has more power even.
Yeah. And what is the parable he's talking about where the snake says, you knew what I was when you picked me up?
I know that there's something like a scorpion and a frog, and the scorpion convinces the frog to ride on its back across the river. And so maybe there's a similar story there where there's this, it has to do with its nature is even after. So the scorpion stings the frog once it crosses the river. And so the nature of the beast just takes over no matter what it says. It just does what it wants to do.
I think it's interesting that he said that he made it 10 years without being excommunicated. Now, I'm not nearly the size. I don't have an audience like John Dehlin yet, but
and you're not bothered by the threat of excommunication for some reason, right?
Not in the least. As a matter of fact, I would kind of look at it as a red badge of courage if they came to my doorstep knocking, because I could not care any less.
That's right. And I know Jeremy Runnels, who wrote, as part of the CES letter, creation, when he was getting excommunicated, before they ended the meeting, he handed his resignation letter to them. So he said, I excommunicate you because you're the one that's not being Christ-like in a way, right? And honest.
Yep. Good for him.
So had you ever thought about resigning?
I think the answer is I haven't even cared enough to resign.
Right.
Make
them do all the work.
Yeah, I don't even care. I know people say, well, they'll count you as another member. Well, guess what? They would count me anyway, because they're not honest about their attendance, about their records. And I don't care I don't even care enough to waste my time to resign.
Yeah, and I think for John, the idea that he could stay in the church as long as possible was important to his mission, because he wanted faithful people to see his show and understand that there's problems and accept that other people have reasons to leave. And a week from tomorrow, we're going to do a Tuesdays with Tim show about the Inconvenient Faith series that's recently out, where John Dehlin on Mormonism Live, I believe last week, said that, it's a good program. It's a good product. It's going to tell faithful members that there's problems with the history, there's problem with the leaders, there's problems with the church, and that, be nice to people that leave, because they're just doing what their integrity says to do.
Yeah.
And if you want to stay through all the problems because you have integrity about something, about staying for your family or staying to try to help the church be better, that's valid too. And so we'll get back to the show then.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear
Megan's follow-up question.
To hear Megan's follow-up question about how this has affected John's family.
Was there a loss of enthusiasm when you got excommunicated? Because that must have been devastating for you. And so was there any time where after you got excommunicated where you felt like you had made the wrong choice, or where you felt like maybe you wanted to change directions, or any of that kind of impact after you got excommunicated?
I caught my stepson spying on me in the shower. At the same time that my husband used this trick to get hard, I discovered something crazy with a Boston doctor.
Honestly, my personality type is you excommunicate me for telling the truth and trying to support marginalized communities. I'm more motivated than ever. That's going to be a mistake you regret. That's
like
just
like Darth Vader killing Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah. You strike us down, you just make us stronger.
Yeah.
No, that made me more motivated, more determined than ever. That was if the church wanted me to go away, that was the dumbest thing they could have done, because they made me want to do this for the rest of my life when they excommunicated me.
Yeah, they poured gasoline on that fire.
That's just how I am. Yeah.
So then, as you continue to go on with Mormon stories after your excommunication, and you're, it's going like wildfire now, were you aware of how closely the church was keeping track of what you were doing? And if so, can you talk a little bit about that? And did you realize that you were being compared to Satan and that you were on the watch lists and things like that?
Yeah, that was fun. So in the early days, I had to have like a third-party website doing my analytics, but it would always show individually who was downloading my episodes, and it would show what domain they were downloading from. So every day I would go up and see LDS.org, that people at the LDS Church were downloading my episodes. I had this crazy experience where I was going to church headquarters to visit my brother, or to visit a friend or something, and I get in the elevator, and a dude gets in the elevator and he hears my voice, because at the time there was no video, and he looks at my voice and he smiles and he's like, "Hey, I know you." You know what I mean? And then I'm like walking by open offices and I'm seeing Mormon stories on the screens of church employees.
Wow.
And then employees would just secretly reach out to me. Like, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a I'm spacing on his name right now, but there was a one person in charge of signing all of the excommunication or the membership withdrawal letters. It's a guy, his son was a good friend of Ryan McKnight, and they teamed up to do Mormon leaks. And I feel really Greg Dodge, I think was his name. Anyway, if you resign from the church, you would get a letter from the church signed by Greg Dodge. And I remember Greg Dodge, who signed the "You're no longer a member" letters, as a church employee, reaching out to me secretly and saying, "I don't believe in the church anymore, and it's my job to sign all these excommunication resignation letters. But I've always had bishops and stake presidents and seminary and institute teachers and BYU employees, always missionaries, always reaching out to me, emailing me, meeting with me secretly. Bishops, actively serving bishops. That's been true from the very, very beginning. People at all levels. Hans Mattson was an area authority for the church. He was an avid Mormon Stories listener. Like that whole Swedish rescue started out as a Sweden Mormon Stories listener support group. I've been listened to by church employees from the start. And I've also, as soon as Fair Mormon and Daniel Peterson and Lewis Midgley started attacking me and Greg Smith and all those people, I knew that I was being tracked very closely by church headquarters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also,
I loved it. That just made me so happy. It made me delighted, thrilled beyond
John,
measure.
you worked a little bit for the church and you knew that they tracked future leadership, right? And so that would give you a little bit of edge on some things that you did.
Yeah, 2007 to 2008, I moved to Salt Lake and did database migrations for the LDS Church. And while I was there, they asked me to work on a general authority candidate tracking database. So
that's probably the first time you saw my name, maybe.
Yeah, it's still there. It's still there. Your name's still there, as far as I know. No, but yeah, general authorities would visit mission presidents, stake presidents, and temple presidents and interview them over time and ask them lots of questions. And so they had this database where they could enter in their impressions and information from those PPIs, we can call them, so that then they could know the status of who they might be considering to be a general authority.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's kind of scary. I mean, it's not surprising, right? To know that, but I have another question, and you can, obviously, since we're recording, you can edit this out if you decide you don't want to answer it, but I'm curious about, because you are so well known and you are right there in the middle of the Mormon bubble, I think all of us as creators have to consider the impact of our publicity on our family and our loved ones. For you, at least from my perspective, seems like that's exponential to any of the rest of us who are in this space. Are you willing to talk about the impact that it's had on your family and your kids? And if so, how did you get through that and, make it to the point where you and your family can have peace with the sort of disruption to your life?
You've never seen a pillow like this before. Have you heard about Dorilla Ergo? It's the cutting-edge ergonomic pillow that people actually look forward to later.
Yeah. So there's always been a safety concern doing the podcast. I try not to talk much about that, but there is a history of sometimes some violence in the church historically. Now, having said that, I watched the September 6th and Grant Palmer and others, and no one ever got harmed for their activism or for their critiques of the church. So I had no reason to believe I or my family would be physically harmed by that. That doesn't mean it can't happen, but I just decided, honestly, the church taught me too well. They said, do what is right, let the consequence follow. And I really internalized that. So I never let safety concerns stop me. And, maybe that was foolish, but that's just how I felt and still feel. When the podcast was, in the first 10 years of Mormon Stories, most people didn't know what a podcast was. Like, when did podcasts really explode? When did y'all start listening to podcasts just at all? Do any of you remember the year? Because I felt like for the first 10 years, nobody listened to podcasts, other than a few people. You know what I mean?
For me, it was only about probably 5 years ago. I think when I got a new iPhone, that there was this little, iTunes thing, this little podcast thing that I didn't really know anything about. So I just out of curiosity checked it out. I thought, oh, that's so cool. But I think for me, I've always consumed podcasts on YouTube for whatever reason, you know, rather than on a podcast platform. So it wasn't on my radar at all until 5 years ago.
But that's crazy, Megan, because that's 14 years into the Life of Mormon Stories before you started listening. How about?
Well, I didn't even start listening then. I didn't start listening to Mormon Stories until January of last year, you know, 2023.
Yeah.
And then I had my faith crisis a month later, you know.
Well, I just mean that's 14 years into Mormon Stories life before you even started listening to podcasts, really.
Yeah.
How about you guys? The other two.
For me, it was my son as a student. Let's see, he graduated in 2006, and in high school, he would wear headphones, and everybody else would be listening to music, and he was listening to lectures, podcast lectures from other, you know, like universities or other things like that, talking about, you know, things he was learning a lot of things. So since he was learning a lot of things from it, I knew to stay away from
What year was that? What year did you learn about podcasts?
2006, 7, and 8 is when he.
Oh, wow. So that's pretty early.
Yeah. So he was consuming stuff. He was always into technology.
Okay.
Things. And so
when did you start listening to podcasts, Gene?
So just 2013.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I can't even remember how
I
got into it, except for maybe my sons were telling me about YouTube, and, you know, we were listening to pop music. Like, what's that song from the South Korean?
Like Gangnam Style.
Gangnam Style and stuff like that. So maybe because I had looked up other Mormon things, you know, that YouTube started suggesting Mormon Stories or something like that.
How about you, Maven? When did you start listening to podcasts?
I think after my mission, and I think when going back to school, and then I would have some jobs where I was working at nights and they would be really low. So I think I started with, I think, audiobooks, and then also some downloadable lectures that there were very few of them available at the time, but I think I might have come across a couple. And so I would get bored of listening to music. And so I would start to incorporate these. And a lot of times they would be downloads. Like I would like physically have to download them to my computer and then like re-download them to a device or something. It was a very manual process.
I remember that.
Click these links and find them on the internet and then put them on my device.
That sounds early. That sounds pretty early.
Yeah. 2003.
Something because I went on my mission 2008, 2009. So I think it might have been early when I was doing that, but I think eventually as podcasts started to become more popular, they got kind of looped in and added, and then eventually took over like audiobooks and stuff. So
well, Megan, to answer the other part of your question, the podcast wasn't the hardest part about the podcast on my family early on was how distracted I was, how I was just constantly, I was waking up at 3 every morning, doing interviews. I was really loud. My kids would hear me interviewing people through the walls. That was annoying for my kids because my studio was in the basement and my kids had rooms adjacent to my studio, and I would do it late at night and early in the morning. That was annoying. Margie would always get mad. I was being loud while everyone was sleeping. That was annoying. I was always trying to get Margie to meet with listeners or have lunch or dinner with listeners, or I was always out meeting or talking to listeners. That was annoying. I think I neglected my marriage and being a dad by finding this passion that I was just so committed to. Now, Margie would say I was a committed dad. I was at every one of my kids' tennis matches or school awards, or, you know, that I spent a lot of time with my kids. But the truth is, I spent a crap ton of time doing the podcast. But more importantly, like, this was also exciting and energizing for me, that my brain was always spinning. So it was very normal to be at the dinner table and my brain is elsewhere and people have to repeat what they say. There was a joke where one time my daughter Clara said to me, my friend Megan turned 5, and my answer was, "Good job." Like that. That's what it was like sometimes when I was really in Mormon Stories brain mode.
So anyway, Randy, One thing when he asked me, like when I started listening, so I started listening actually to Mormon Stories podcast right in 2013, and he actually helped me stay attending because he had his Stay Mormon. He talked about people getting divorces and stuff, and he didn't want that to happen. And he would talk about how if you just let it happen, right?
Yeah.
If you just let whatever history lesson was going on, just let it slide. It didn't really matter. You could go to church, you could hold your wife's hand, you get to hold her hand for an hour, sing songs. You break up holding the hand so you could take the sacrament, but then you go right back to holding the hands. And so for a year and a half or so, I stayed attending, even though I was losing interest. But then when Kate Kelly got excommunicated, I stopped paying tithing. I told my wife I can't pay tithing anymore to a church that excommunicates a woman for having a thought and expressing it publicly. Right. So bad. And then I stopped attending when John Dehlin got excommunicated. And so that's why, in a way, I feel obliged to honor John in his 20th year anniversary of podcasting. And so what else thoughts do you have about what we just listened to?
Well, I think John brings out the point, like Barbara Mandrell used to sing, he was podcaster when podcaster wasn't cool.
That's right.
He started back in the day before people really listened to very many podcasts. Now, did he start off with just an Audible podcast?
So, yeah, I think in late 2004 and early 2005, for the first half of 2005, he released audio versions, but he had recorded some in video. And so then on September 4th, 2005, he released, I believe, 4 videos all in the same day. I'm sure that was not maybe the best thing for the algorithm, if they had an algorithm back then, whatever it was. But so, yeah, he had to get his audience converted from podcasting venues to going onto YouTube. And so he probably, did those both together. And then as far as time goes, Randy, how much time do you put into this part-time podcasting world?
Shockingly, a great deal of time, because when I'm not doing this, I am learning more about YouTube, more about StreamYard, more about how to actually post these things. Plus, I do a video now and then just on my own, just myself talking. Sometimes it's an explanatory video of why I left the LDS Church, what my feelings are at that particular moment. So yeah, there's really never a time where this goes out of my brain. So I can just imagine the time John had to put in.
And you always mention that I've had lots of people on, and I have had over 200 people appear on Latter Daily Digest. And, it's amazing that people would come on when you have like 75 or 22 subscribers, right? But even though I have 2,000 subscribers now, it's almost harder to get people to come on, because some people maybe get intimidated by the fact that there's more than just a few people might watch it. And other people might think, oh, I want to save everything I've got for when John Dehlin or Alyssa or Shalise, interviews me. Or we'll say Megan Connor, right? And so our collaborations with Megan Connor has helped a lot to, we'll say, get people on. But yeah, it's really hard to get guests sometimes. And so I'm thankful for people like Ganesh Chirian, who's pretty much willing to come on whenever I ask him. But,
as just a youngster in this business, because I just started my channel a matter of weeks ago, I'm excited to have 78 subscribers.
Yeah. That was like 3 months into my podcasting career. And then Radio Free Mormon came on the show. And I've told that a few times, the story around that. And that got me, tripled my audience. from 125 to 375 over the matter of a few weeks.
Wow.
Then it was easy to get somebody like Ryan McKnight or other people because I did have, RFM on the show already, right? I could show people, here's a sample of how damn good I am, right? Because not that I'm good, but I'm getting people. And that's what my show's always been about, has been about getting good guests and having a conversation with them.
Who would draw a bigger crowd in our sphere of post-Mormon? John Dehlin or
Alyssa or Shalise?
No. Oh my gosh, I'm having a senior moment. The chick that's so popular with all the kids now, Taylor Swift.
I think more Mormons would watch Taylor Smith more than they would John Dehlin. Taylor Swift.
Well, I may have to give her a call.
See if she'll come on the show.
Yeah.
And
if she does, I'll let you co-host with me.
That's right. We will do it. Okay, so I'll play the last little bit of this part of the show, and we'll go on from there.
The things got really hard for my family once the bishop started doing inquiries against me, and our membership started to be threatened. And it got really bad when I got excommunicated, and then it became a global news story, and all my kids lost their friends, and we all left the church. Like, that was literally traumatizing, I think, for all my family, including Margie. And so many of them have said, why did you move to like conservative Mormon Logan, Utah, to then have a global, news story excommunication? That's almost cruel to do that to us as a family. So, that was really hard on the kids, although I think now they're glad they're not in the church anymore. But yeah, that was excruciating for my entire family as well. And then I think probably the biggest thing of all that Margie and I have had to work through is that I think I've always had a real strong hunger for emotional intimacy. And I think I always had feared giving 100% of my vulnerability to any one person, including Margie, because I'd seen my parents get divorced so many times, and I was just afraid to trust anyone too much. And so I learned as a kid to just have so many people in my lives that I was connected to, where if I lost any one relationship, there would be 12 or 20 or 50 more that I could go to. So I never felt like I was at risk of being rejected or alone. And so what that made it with me and Margie was she was really lonely and desperate for emotional connection. And I was like, what? We watch shows together. What? We exercise together. Like, what do you want? You talk to me. I listen. Like, I give you answers. Like, but she was wanting deeper levels of emotional connection and vulnerability. And I was just giving that to any listener or viewer that I could find, and sometimes didn't bring home the level of intimacy that I was seeking or obtaining elsewhere. And that's something Margie and I have had to really work through, because I was neglecting my family emotionally.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable enough to share that. I think that's so important for people to hear, because especially for other creators to hear, because I think some of us get involved in this area of doing these passion projects, and we don't realize that we're giving that passion to, this thing that we're doing. And so the people in our lives maybe get less of us in that way. And so I think it's important for people to know that it's hard to strike that balance, and it's a struggle for all of us.
Well, thanks. I hope I'm not glib about it, and I hope Margie feels okay, or my kids feel okay with what I shared. But that's just how things have been. And Margie and I have been pretty public about this kind of stuff, so I think she'll be okay with it.
I think that's one of the things that I appreciate so much about you, John, as a host, is that you're not afraid to share with people your real experiences that you're going through. I think one of the first episodes that I saw of Mormon Stories was your preamble to the episode with the Secret Mormon Meetings of 1922, when you got on and you were super fired up and super angry all over again with the secrecy of the brethren and stuff. And I appreciate that so much about you, because you're not a persona. I think what we see on Mormon Stories is the real John Dehlin.
Well, I hope that's true. I'm sure there's some things that folks don't know, and I've got a ton of flaws and weaknesses, and I don't know how often. I'm sure those come out, but I'm sure not all of them come out. So I'm never disappointed when people attack me or debase me or criticize me, because I don't want to be idolized. I don't want to be anyone's prophet or hero. And I love it when people come at me. And even when problems are exposed, just so that I don't ever fall trap to being idolized or worshiped. People joke like, oh, you're the ex-Mormon prophet. I don't think ex-Mormons see me as a prophet. I think they see me as a flawed, broken, problematic person. And I think that's how I am. So I'm glad people see me that way.
I'm pretty sure that people see John as such a flawed person, they even start making things up about him sometimes.
It's happened once or twice.
So there you go. That was where we the Gen Camp thing was coming up. And so what do you think about that, Randy?
I think that this whole thing was really enlightening for me. You know, it humanizes John, and he walked through hell to get where he's at. And I respect him that much more for it.
Yeah, so we are sharing this because this is the week that the 20th anniversary of John first appearing on YouTube. Thanks everybody for watching. We might do the part 2 tomorrow or Wednesday, and on Thursday we're going to do a show to try to celebrate Mormon Stories Podcast's 20th birthday, we'll say. And so everybody. Go ahead.
Oh, and if you haven't, not to sound cliche, but if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button on this, that'd be great. That always helps us out. And you know, if I'm sure all of you are subscribed, but if you're not, that would be another great thing for you to do.
That's right. And we honor all the other podcasters out there as well. And right now, the Mormon News is on. Both Rebecca Biblioteca's channel and Bill Reel's channel. So we're going to head out there, or at least I am, and anybody else can go over there. So everybody have a great rest of 2025, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.